Welcome back into the Basketball Society podcast. I have my good friend here for the first time this year. Happy Black History Month, by the way, brother. I forgot to say that before we, but when you first got on here, but uh, had him on a bunch last year. We like to get into NBA stuff. This is NBA insider Brandon Scoop B Robinson, Scoop B Radio, scoopb.com. I want to talk a bit with the trade deadline coming up about Giannis Antetokounmpo. We did talk a bit about him last year when the trade rumors and stuff have been circulating for a while, and I feel like it got to a point, Brandon, where I feel like everyone just wants him out of Milwaukee. What have you heard, and what are you thinking about where we are in the Giannis trade rumor speculation?
Currently, from folks across the league that I've spoken to, Miami does have a genuine interest in Giannis, but from sources close and familiar to Giannis's thinking, there is kind of an issue with the head honcho, Pat Riley, with the Miami Heat, and that Giannis doesn't necessarily. There's a level of rigidity that comes with playing for the Miami Heat. You talk to folks across the league, namely guys like Bam Adebayo, who's a current Miami Heat player. You talk about past guys like Mario Chalmers, who we've had on Scoopy Radio as well. And there's a way that you go about your day. Certain amount of body fat, certain amount of discipline, certain amount of just regimented things. And people that I speak to across the league, they question whether or not that is something that Giannis would be on board with. But you go back to my original reporting back in April of last year, and some of the things that Miami represents stands out. I'm told from league sources that Giannis is interested in playing in an East Coast market. Miami is in the East Coast, as is the Milwaukee Bucks, the current team he's on. There was a thought process back in the spring of last year that the Brooklyn Nets, as well as the Toronto Raptors, would be on board with that. And I'm told, league sources shared with me probably about a month ago, that one in Emmanuel Quigley of the Toronto Raptors was actually a discussion with the Atlanta Hawks in an ultimate trade that had happened between both the Toronto Raptors and the Atlanta Hawks. Trae Young, now a member of the Washington Wizards. And, so when you think of Toronto, it is a team that would be of interest to Giannis at the time in the spring when I reported that last year. They had a certain gentleman who's no longer with the organization, the front office, that Giannis actually has a good relationship with. So, Toronto is no longer in that figure also because it's been intimated to me and some of my other colleagues that both Scotty Barnes, an all-star with the Raptors now, as well as Brandon Ingram, are not part of any trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo. The Brooklyn Nets, sources within the organization share with me that they've kind of cooled on that notion. I had lunch with a player who is both a former Buck and a former Net. Had breakfast with him, and he told me that Giannis actually almost became a Brooklyn Net over the summer, and those talks kind of stalled. So I know that the Brooklyn Nets are out of it. Then you look across the river from Brooklyn to Manhattan. You look at the Knicks. There has been a constant interest both between the New York Knicks and Giannis Antetokounmpo. But the problem is, in order for the Knicks to actually get Giannis, the Knicks would actually have to include a third or fourth team to make the math work and the personnel work. I know that Karl Anthony Towns, a member of the Knicks, is available in any trade for Giannis, but then you're looking at OG Anunoby, the Knicks' defensive anchor that would have to be part of it. But the issue with all of this, as you're seeing also with John Moran of the Memphis Grizzlies, is a lot of teams want first round picks. I know a couple of weeks ago, the New Orleans Pelicans and the Memphis Grizzlies, the team that John Moran is currently on, those two teams did have a conversation. Part of that deal was to include DeJounte Murray of the Pelicans, as well as um, Jordan Poole on the Pelican side, and on the Memphis Grizzlies side, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, as well as John Morant, was the talking point. But the sticking point in all of that is the Memphis Grizzlies wanted a first round pick, and the Pelicans declined. So what you're seeing is there are a lot of picks, there are a lot of just conversations that are happening across the league, and the Milwaukee Bucks, for example, want to prepare for the future. If you're going to give up a top 10 guy and Giannis Antetokounmpo, on the other side, the Bucks want to be fully, compensated. And the talk that I'm hearing from calls I've been getting and texts I've been getting from just executives and those who are in the know is that um, the Bucks are price gouging. The Golden State Warriors are a team that is popular, but Jimmy Butler is not going to be included in any trade from everyone that I've spoken to. Jimmy, of course, tore his ACL. But I'll tell you, Martin, one of the things that I've heard that's kind of like a quiet, loud whisper is that there is a team that could actually make moves and have the assets to do so, and they're in the Western Conference, and that team is the Portland Trailblazers, who has first-time All-Star Diddy Advia on their team. So, you know, those are quiet rumblings that people in NBA circles are talking about, the Portland Trailblazers as the team that you should be watching out for in these conversations. These conversations are fluid, and of course, the NBA's trading deadline ends Thursday at around 3 o'clock. Hey, what's going on, everybody? NBA insider Brandon Scoop B. Robinson checking in with the Basketball Society podcast. Make sure to check me out on all platforms at Scoop B on Twitter and Instagram. Subscribe to the Scoop B Radio podcast. And most importantly, check out the Scoop B blog at scoopb.com.
It doesn't seem like there's like a perfect scenario out there just yet, right? And maybe that's part of why this may play out past a trade deadline. But it's weird because it feels like Milwaukee needs, they need the right return, they need something, and they want to send. Feels like they want to do right by Giannis and send him where he would prefer to be. So that alignment feels pretty complicated right now.
And I'll add, when you're a star of that caliber of Giannis, teams will work with you to get you to where you want to go. I use the example of Chris Paul back when he was a member of the Oklahoma City Thunder a few years ago. If you remember, I was with you at Basketball Society, writing at basketballsociety.com at the time, and I had given a long list of teams that had interest in Chris Paul. Back then, you had the New York Knicks, you had the 76ers, you had the Oklahoma City Thunder, you had the Suns, you had a behemoth of teams that were looking to bring Chris Paul in, and from me just building a better relationship with the Oklahoma City Thunder organization, and seeing Chris Paul in passing, just conversations that I've had with those who were in the know, is that Chris Paul actually sat down with Sam Presti, who's the head guy over with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Phoenix Suns is where Chris Paul wanted to go to, and he ultimately went from the Oklahoma City Thunder to the Phoenix Suns. Now, comparatively, you look at Chris Paul in this situation now, the Los Angeles Clippers, and of course, from all of that I know behind the scenes, it was really an issue with both he and Ty Lue, head coach there, where they felt that there was an undermining of his stature as a player, and then undermining the head coach. And Ty Lue took it upstairs to the front office with Lawrence Frank, and from what I know, that situation won't bear the same for Chris Paul and with the Clippers, where he had a better relationship with the Thunder with Sam Presti and was able to go to Phoenix. So you look at Giannis and you look at the situation there. I'm sure that that the front office and the brain trust with the Milwaukee Bucks will try to find a way to accommodate. The other issue is this: Giannis, there's a deadline for him to sign an extension on his deal, and so he'll get the most elasticity out of his contract if he is traded and then ultimately signs an extension with another team. And if he waits till the offseason, he won't get that money. And so there is an onus on the Bucks' part to ask, or rather Giannis's representation in Octagon to ask the Bucks to kind of expedite that process. And so there's talks around the league that Wednesday or Thursday a deal could happen, but ultimately the Bucks don't just have to rush to trade Giannis Antetokounmpo. Anything that they do is either a courtesy, or B, something that is going to for the betterment of their organization. That's why, to me, just from a basketball perspective, as you know, I come from the Nets background, so I kind of know the thought process there. But in my conversations with the Nets, my thought process was, well, why wouldn't you offer a deal that would include Michael Porter Jr. as well as Cam Thomas, hypothetically,
Sure.
Right? But from every indication that I've gotten from the Nets organization, they're looking to build their team with Michael Porter Jr. As well as, not so much Cam Thomas, but ultimately they have the picks, they have the star power, but it's seemingly that's where the Nets' direction is. And from talking to that organization, it seems, Giannis wants to be in a family type organization. His brother plays for the Bucks. His wife and his kids are very instrumental with the organization behind the scenes, and it's a different scenario in Brooklyn as opposed to Milwaukee. So then you look at other teams, like I said, the Portland Trailblazers, who have the assets and the war chest of assets to go after a guy of Giannis's caliber. But you're going to see the Golden State Warriors and the New York Knicks continue to vie up until the trade deadline. So we'll see.
Speaking of that Portland note that you made, I did see a report floating around there. Not sure if you know of this to be a thing or be true, but I saw something floating around out there that Giannis would be interested in rejoining with Drew Holiday specifically as a teammate. Do you know of that as being legitimate?
Um, do I know it to be legitimate? I know the way that Giannis would think, and so that would make sense. Nike is in Oregon, but in addition to that, the Trailblazers have quite. Not only is Drew Holiday in Portland, so is Damian Lillard.
It's just crazy because Giannis, maybe more so than anyone in the league right now, Brandon, singularly coming to your team creates championship expectations. I mean, he's still in his prime, right? He's still in his ultra dominant form. Knicks fans, talking about how they don't think it's realistic. They don't really want Towns. We don't really have like what we would need to really deal for him. And just in, casual group chat talk, like some of us would be like, man, y'all better be ready to send anybody. Like I, I tend to be on the side, Brandon, when it's someone like Giannis. I tend to be like, man, I feel like I'd be ready to send almost anybody and everybody and just figure the rest out. Like one of my friends was like, well, we already don't shoot well. What does that look like adding Giannis to a non-shooting team? I'm like, man, figure it out. It's Giannis. Like it should be fine. Like you've got Giannis. I think you'll be okay to figure out who else can space the floor for you.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that Knicks team, just taking a cursory look, like their bread and butter is obviously Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns, right? But then
Mhm.
OG Anunoby is the defensive anchor. I mean, this is a team that had high expectations of winning the whole thing last year, and you go into this season, and there was those continued expectations. But what has happened in the Eastern Conference is that there's been a level up. When you look across the league, the Boston Celtics have exceeded expectations this year. I was just with Jalen Brown, and you can check out the article over at Scoopy.com. And he told me he took it personally that people only thought that they would win 30 games, the Boston Celtics, of course, this season. And you look at the Cavaliers, who just made a trade to get even better. They fortified the backup point guard position and bringing in Dennis Schroeder, but also. There's an open spot. We've talked about this openly. If the Cavaliers don't win it this year, there's a gentleman in Los Angeles that might like to have a word with his hometown team there in LeBron James. So you look at the Eastern Conference, Giannis staying in the Eastern Conference and an Eastern Conference that is seemingly up for grabs comparatively to a Western Conference side where you have an Oklahoma, you have a Denver, you have a Minnesota, you have a Lakers team, you have a Clippers team, you have all these teams that are just competitive. The Eastern Conference might be I don't want to say easier slope, just a well managed slope on the out on the resort that you can stay in and float and win. So I think for the Knicks, I think the issue is they have Bridges,
Yeah.
they have just guys that people would assume the Knicks will just give up. But though Bridges to me is a systems guy, he's not the guy you at this point you build around. You've seen him be the star in Brooklyn, and you're now seeing him being in a familiar role with the New York Knicks that he was in Phoenix. Like so just giving up Towns and then what is the question? And I
Yeah.
saw a report the other day where, it says the New York Knicks are no longer interested in, trading for Giannis Antetokounmpo. That sounds like they don't have enough assets to get him, so they're going to bow out gracefully.
Hmm.
That doesn't sound like, they're not interested. Like, of course you'd be interested. We're all interested. I'm sure your local AAU team is interested. It's just the right pieces have to fall into place for the Bucks in order for the Bucks to feel comfortable enough to ship Giannis to, a respective team across the league.
Sure. And I think the Knicks are in a good spot. I mean, they're second in the East right now. They're making good progress. I know people are a little like Cat isn't having a great season. First
And
year under Mike Brown, he struggled a little bit, but they're still a top two team in the East. I think they should still be considered. I know Detroit is at the top and they're proven to be something, right? But I mean, New York's going to be a front runner to win the East. So, I mean, we've talked about with the Knicks too, like they've been very methodical year to year in season, making the trades, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, they got Mikal Bridges in, they brought Cat in, like they've been really reconstructing and it feels like they've hit on almost all of these moves. We'll see if the head coach move really pans out, right? But it, I don't see it as, even though what I said before, like I think the Knicks are an example of they're in a good spot. I feel like people are just ready to be too hard on the Knicks, right? And they have, they've created these expectations because they're a top tier team. But I think the Knicks are an example of a team that's fine. Like I don't think they need to trade for Giannis to make. I don't see Giannis as like the last puzzle piece for the Knicks. I think they may be okay right now.
I think they're okay. But I also think that the Bucks in the second half of the season after the All-Star break could also compete in the East also. I was with the Milwaukee Bucks about 2 weeks ago. I was at the Martin Luther King Day game in Atlanta, and I just really watched Giannis's body language on the court and on the bench. And I know that Giannis is seemingly hurt. Um, I feel like in watching, this is my opinion, watching Giannis on the bench, he looked disconnected from his team.
Okay.
He's on the end of the bench with a towel on his head. Um, when there was timeouts, he was standing off to the side. He was disengaged. And on the court, running up and down the court, he just looked like is exasperated. And going back after the game, he's sitting down in his locker, sulking. But then when the lights came on and the cameras were on him, he was saying all the right things. To me, it's more than just if the Bucks can play. To me, it's a matter of does he want to play with the Bucks?
Yeah.
Problem with Giannis in this situation is I think he's scared to say how
Mm.
he feels because you are running the risk of alienating fans. And I feel like you look at LeBron's run with the Cavs the first time and then going to Miami, right? The Cavs fans were noticeably angry with him. He will forever have the ultimate draw four uh, wild card in saying that I came back to Cleveland and won y'all a championship, and this is in real time. But back then, they were very angry. When you look at the Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis leaving, especially when you've doubled down and say you want to stay, it makes for um, good theater, and it makes for people questioning your motives and you just worrying about your brand. And I think comparatively, when you look across the league, you see other guys in situations like that. You look at LaMelo Ball in Charlotte. Now noticeably they've won at the time of this recording about 5 or 6 straight games and doing their thing. But there was a point where Charlotte wasn't doing well, and you hear things in the locker rooms and things that people tell you to the side, and you wonder, you know, they've won some games, so all is well with both he and his head coach. But prior to that, there's a level of anger. There's reports that have come out about his thought process and whether he wants to stay. I've heard that he doesn't, but they're winning right now. So winning cures all. As a former athlete yourself, I'm sure you can recognize that. But you look across the league, a lot of these guys are scared to share that they don't want to be there anymore, and so
Mm.
Giannis in that box.
That's so interesting. It's clear that he's not, and many people are not the late great Kobe Bryant, but just in terms of that attitude or mentality, get me out of here, trade me, like and he doesn't. Giannis doesn't come off as the type to just be that blunt about it, to demean his teammates, to upset the fans, right? Like not to say he's a people pleaser or he wants everyone to love him. I think I think he's just more polite than wanting to be like blatantly and bluntly honest and rude about his situation.
I would agree with that. I would co-sign that, but I also will say that your Kobe assessment, while he was loyal to one team, there were many years where he wanted out.
Yeah. And said it. I mean, yeah.
He wanted out, um, and his teammates knew it, front office knew it, and they went out and got him Pau Gasol, and they won a couple more championships after the Shaq era with Kobe, the Shakobe era. But I also think Kobe played at a different time, and I think Kobe, as well as Tim Duncan, were the last of the Mohicans of guys who stayed with one team.
I go back to you being the first to break and report not just that LeBron was going to the Lakers, but why he was going to the Lakers, business and brand. as well as basketball, of course. And when you talk about Giannis's motivations, I just wonder what, like you mentioned the family thing, but it's like, even as you mentioned like Eastern Conference team, right? I mean, do you think does a spot like Toronto interest him more? Does he want like the more of a big market? We've seen him do all he's done in a small market in Milwaukee this whole time. Do you think he's looking to like change his environment in that way of not just talent around him, but the city that he's in?
The intel that I get on Giannis as far as that goes is that he wants to have creative control, similarly to what he has in Milwaukee. And to me, in the
Mm,
spring, I started reporting about the Nets and the Toronto Raptors as suitors. Of course, there was another person in that front office in Masai Ujiri who is no longer in the Toronto Raptors front office. So I would imagine that that changes some things. I also think that if you're going by the intel that I'm getting about the Miami Heat and Giannis and him not feeling Pat Riley, some of that actually has a scope of work when you look at it. Part of the reason why LeBron James left the Miami Heat was because of Pat Riley, and because he knew that him going to Cleveland would give him new life with a team that included at the time Kyrie Irving, Tristan Thompson, and others on that team, and then Cleveland ultimately went and got Kevin Love and more. So to go back to the question about Giannis with the Miami Heat, I've spoken with some members of the Heat, both past and present, and their thought process is, well, if you get somebody like Giannis, you're going to have to adjust a little bit. And if their synopsis on that further, that you saw Pat Riley budge quite a bit with Jimmy Butler uh, when Jimmy was there.
mm,
Ultimately, I think Jimmy's temperament is a little different than Giannis's, and so I don't think that Giannis would be the quote unquote problem that Jimmy is. But I do think that you get someone of Giannis's caliber, you adjust accordingly. I just personally don't think that the things that the Heat are offering the Bucks are comparable to what you're getting in a star like Giannis. I don't feel that I feel the same way about the Golden State Warriors.
mhm.
That way about the New York Knicks to a degree.
Right.
Like to me, Giannis and Karl Anthony Towns are not equal value.
Right. No, I mean, not even close, really.
So then to me, I go back to what I said about the Brooklyn Nets. I feel like if you're looking to build a young squad, you bring in a Cam Thomas and you bring in a Michael Porter Jr. to the table. But everybody that I speak to on the net side, they seem to intimate to me that they're not interested. Now, is that a cat and mouse game they're playing? Time will tell. But I also do think that, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up. If I'm the Bucks, I don't listen to pressure that might be mounting on the Giannis side to get a deal done. I actually wait till the summer for a couple of reasons, because the New Orleans Pelicans and the Atlanta Hawks will have more capital to offer at the draft time. I feel the same way about the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets have consistently, you know, added draft or trade capital through the draft and through assets, whether those are potential star players. Um, I also think that that would also help Miami to have a little bit more to offer the Bucks as well. And we've seen situations where guys have conversations at the trade deadline and then they revisit it in some way, shape, or form later on. I go back to 2021 when I had reported that Lonzo Ball, then a member of the New Orleans Pelicans, had the interest of the Los Angeles Clippers, the Chicago Bulls, um, and a few other teams. It's been 5 years since I reported that, but I know that the Chicago Bulls were really, 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 really gung ho on getting Lonzo Ball. And one of the sticking points at the trade deadline in 2021, and this was, of course, the same thing with Kyle Lowry, who was of interest to the Miami Heat at the time. He was then a member of the Toronto Raptors, and in both cases with Lonzo Ball and Kyle Lowry, Lonzo Ball, the only reason why he did not join the Chicago Bulls at the deadline was because the Pelicans wanted Kobe White and the Chicago Bulls said no. And then in the offseason, they ended up getting Lonzo Ball, just signing him outright. And they overpaid Nikola Vucevic in order to do that, because the Bulls' thought process was a pairing of Nikola Vucevic, Lonzo Ball, and Zach LaVine at the time, then a member of the Bulls, could potentially run the Eastern Conference and bring him a championship. And of course, Lonzo was hurt a lot, and Zach LaVine and Kobe White really shouldered the load in that instance. But then when you look at Kyle Lowry was this close. If you remember at the trade deadline, I tweeted Kyle Lowry, Miami Heat. And then I had it actually got sent back. People were laughing at me all summer. And then he ultimately signed with the Miami Heat in the offseason. So a lot of times these things get revisited. And so if I'm Milwaukee, I don't just jump on what people are offering. I actually look in the offseason to see what people are offering because it's more of a lax environment and people can prepare for their teams going into next season in the summertime. Those are just my experiences from things I've reported and things I've seen across the league.
Whatever this next phase of Giannis's career is going to be, I just think it's going to be fascinating. Your point about like the creative control thing, I wonder how much of that will be impacted by where he is. It feels like, again, if he goes to another kind of small market, a Portland or more of a Toronto type, as opposed to a New York or a Miami, it feels like that in itself would play a factor in how much like creative control he has. I mean, imagine Giannis in the New York media. I mean, what does that even mean and look like? It feels like in that media landscape, he he's gonna have a certain level of control because of who he is, obviously. But like in a media heavy landscape, feels like you're gonna have to play ball with a lot of different variables that are out of your control.
That creative control in New York is the reason why Kai and Kevin chose the Nets and not the Knicks.
Hmm.
They knew that it was something new in Brooklyn that had never been done before. And the Kyrie and Kevin Durant were the reason why they actually took less money to bring in DeAndre Jordan as part of the package deal. Because DeAndre had a relationship with both Kevin Durant, if they're both Texas alum, and then Kyrie and DeAndre had their own relationship as well. And over time in that player empowerment era, I'm told, that Sean Marks kind of got tired of them kind of pushing him around, and he wanted to regain a level of dominance in that system. And from then on, some would argue that he lost that control. Some would argue that he gained that control. That's up for the debate. But I think when you're coming to an organization like the New York Knicks, it's self-made, and you kind of fall in line. Jalen Brunson, has seemingly benefited from that system and become a bigger star. But then you look at somebody like Julius Randle, who lost his leverage and then got hurt. But ultimately, they couldn't pair Brunson and Randle together at the same time because they were two primary ball handlers, and you know, bringing in Cat kind of balanced that out. And so when you look at that notion there, and potentially bringing in a Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think he's actually the opposite of Randall. To me, Randall is more of a blue collar LeBron or a blue collar Andre Iguodala as far as running in offense. And in Minnesota, that's seemingly working well, playing alongside Anthony Edwards and even Mike Conley Jr. Mike Conley Jr. is a good guy, and he's been gracious with his time with me, and he's told me that spacing on the floor has actually benefited he and that organization playing alongside Julius Randle, because he's a dual threat as a playmaker and as a scorer. But when you look at Giannis, I don't think he dominates the ball the same way that Julius Randle does. He actually glides to the basket. He is a good problem to have because he spaces the floor, draws the double teams, can just get any shot he wants, and also can play make and make the job actually easier at his size to see the length of the floor to actually get Jalen Brunson more shots. But again, this part of this conversation reminds me so much of the New York Knicks when they gave up a Danilo Gallinari, a Wilson Chandler, and some of those other pieces to the Denver Nuggets to bring in Carmelo Anthony. Danilo Gallinari, who was traded to the Nuggets for Carmelo Anthony. Anthony has told me, now retired, has told me that that organization or those players who were in that organization at the time always talk about the what if. What if they had stayed one more year and they didn't trade to get Carmelo? They just added Carmelo to that puzzle. I really do think that had they waited a year, I think they would have given the Miami Heat some problems back then. That was when Dwayne Wade and LeBron and Chris Bosh were running things. And so if I'm the New York Knicks, I'm not looking to repeat history again. And maybe that's the stance that they're taking for that reason.
You know how I know you actually love basketball? Because you're here looking for real hoops talk, not just hot takes. Here at Basketball Society, we cover men's and women's basketball with the same passion because to us, it's all just hoop. So make sure you tap in with the Basketball Society podcast, the Protect Our Queens podcast, and everything we drop. Hit subscribe, because if you love basketball, this is where you belong.
NBA insider Brandon Scoop B. Robinson joining me here on the podcast. We are going to stay kind of in the Eastern Conference, you just had a great piece out, spent some time in Toronto with their leading scorer, Brandon Ingram. I told you they're becoming a lot more interesting to me as a group. I mean, when they brought in I said, man, Scotty Barnes, Ingram, Emmanuel Quickly, like that's those are real players. That's something there. So RJ Barrett, they've got players. Those are players, right? Scorers, hoopers, right? So, what can you say about your time with BI and in Toronto?
It was interesting. I actually caught Brandon while I was on a trip to North Carolina and where he's from. And I caught him pregame. I know I've known Brandon Ingram since the day he got drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers in 2016. And it's interesting, just over 10 years, building relationship with not just him, Jaylen Brown and Ben Simmons over the last 10 years. Jaylen Brown and I really got cool in 2019 when something went viral that he said, and he went back and said he didn't say it. We made peace, and then he goes to the NBA Finals in 2022. And then for Brandon Ingram, he and I, in our story, was part of the Anthony Davis trade. And I was with you over at Basketball Society when, I was sharing all of the nuggets and tea leaves that was going on with the Pelicans and the Lakers. And that relationship extended to his time with the Pelicans, and building a relationship with not just him but Zion Williamson and some of the other guys on that team. And so we were actually in North Carolina, and I called him pregame. I said, "You got a few minutes for me after the game?" He goes, "Yeah." Now, typically, when guys give you time, a one-on-one can last you anywhere from 2 minutes to 6 minutes, right? So our interview was about 8 to 10 minutes. And what happened was I was standing outside of the locker room waiting to get in, and Brandon said, "Yo, I got to go see my dad because he's from North Carolina." So Brandon did two things. He went to go see his dad, and while he was going to see his dad upstairs, he went on DoorDash and he ordered Bojangles, right? So Brandon must have came back maybe 10 minutes later. They actually cleared the locker room and all the reporters were gone, but um, he comes back, he goes, "Yo, my man," he hurt his thumb that night. He goes, "Yo, B, my bad." He goes, "Come on, let's go." So me, him, and my producer went in the locker room, and we're the only reporters in there, and there's other players getting changed and out the shower. And we're talking about everything imaginable. I mean, not just him playing on the court. We talked about when he played for the Los Angeles Lakers in that game in 2017 or 2018, where the Lakers played the Rockets and Chris Paul and Rajon Rondo got into that fight. You saw that viral meme where Nipsey Hussle, the late Nipsey Hussle, stood up, and people say online that Nipsey was ready to risk it all. We were talking about that. We talked about that Lakers team that he was on when LeBron tore his groin that year. And I asked him, had LeBron not tore that, hurt his groin, would he have, the Lakers have won a championship? This was pre Anthony Davis coming to the Lakers. He's like, "I don't know. I don't think so." He's like, "We were still young. At that time, you had LeBron, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Michael Beasley, Lance Stevenson. You had a good supporting cast of young guys and a more stoic, serious LeBron on that team." And, not only did we talk about that, Brandon has not publicly really discussed um, his time with the New Orleans Pelicans. And I tweeted that last night. Twitter ate that up, man. It was those conversations along with just his pairing currently in Toronto with Scotty Barnes, who is now an NBA All-Star. And it just, Brandon Ingram does not give many interviews. And when he does, Brandon is pretty insightful. Not a word was spoken about Glorilla. That's his personal business. But we really talked about basketball, and we really just talked about where he is professionally at this point in his career. Toronto, I think, has the potential I think when I look at Brandon Ingram in Toronto, I wonder if that pairing in Toronto is everything that the New Orleans Pelicans were supposed to be during his time there. They have the supporting cast of him, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, who, is a lefty that has issues with the free throw line, but he gets things done when it counts. And he's their seemingly golden child being from Toronto. You got Grady Dick, you have Jakob Poto, you have just a whole bunch of guys on that team. That
Sandro, he's
Yes,
playing well for them.
yes, yes. So yeah, man, I like Toronto. I think Toronto was they're the only non-US team in the NBA that doesn't get a lot of love. And I just felt the need to infiltrate the system to shed more light on them. And you'll be seeing more stuff from guys on that Toronto Raptors team that I'm dropping over at Scoopy.com in the next couple of weeks.
Nice. No, it's really good stuff. That piece with BI was really good. And I remember reading it thinking, I feel like I don't hear from BI a whole lot. And that that speaks to just what you've always done well as a reporter and insider.
The only reason why the interview didn't go longer than 8 to 10 minutes, you want to know why? By
That
the time
Bojangles, the biscuits were too too much.
after security came in the locker room while we were talking with his Bojangles, and my last question, I said, "Listen, man, I know your Bojangles is here. I ain't gonna hold you too long." And I mean, it was steaming hot, but Bojangles is a vibe when you go to North Carolina. He was home. The cool thing is that they actually stayed overnight that night, and so he got a chance to see more of his family and friends. It was actually nursing that thumb injury at the time. He's okay now, but Brandon Ingram deserves to be an all-star. And you're looking at the Eastern Conference. The reserves were named recently. I wouldn't be surprised if, a Giannis, if he doesn't participate, that injury replacement could be Brandon Ingram of the Toronto Raptors. I wouldn't see why not. There are some other guys that are deserving, but Brandon Ingram is very deserving.
Yeah, I spent almost half a semester of college in North Carolina before I transferred to where you and I went to school together. And I learned all about Bojangles and Cookout and all of those lovely spots in the South. You can't beat that.
John Wall put me on the cookout.
Really.
John Wall, it's
Cookout, man. Whoo, you get a couple hot dogs, a corn dog, you get a burger, it's coleslaw, you good to go.
John Wall, a native of Raleigh, North Carolina. One time I asked him something and I said, John, where do you go to get food in Raleigh? He goes, you gotta go to Cookout. And it just like that, he was like, bro, man, for the fifth floor, you gotta go to Cookout. And it was funny because during his time with the Washington Wizards and just in his travels and towards the end of his career, he was a member of the Los Angeles Clippers. And we actually revisited that moment over at when he would at the time when the Clippers were playing at Crypto.com Arena. And he goes, man, I'm on the bigger and better now. Now I go to Soho House. I said, me too. And it was just like a whole, updated conversation. But yeah, you want to know where to go in North Carolina? Raleigh's own John Wall will definitely tell you to go to Cookout.
You brought up Jaylen Brown earlier, how he took things personal coming into this season. No Jason Tatum. I felt like Boston was still going to be good because they still got good players and they've got that system that encourages players like Peyton Pritchard and other guys to step up and still be dynamic and successful. So I felt like Boston was still going to be good. Ceiling may not be as high as I would have with Tatum, obviously, but it's like I didn't think they would fall off a cliff. I do think, and we did talk about this a bit last year and coming into this season, the Eastern Conference, man. I mean, this thing is like it's 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 competitive. It's a little weird. It's a little strange. Like I don't know what to make of it. Coming off of this conversation with Brandon Ingram, Toronto, like you've got situations, Philadelphia, Edgecombe is coming on as like a real dynamic force for them. We know what Maxey and Embiid are, but I mean the East just feels like wide open. Doesn't even feel like
You didn't even name
doesn't do it justice.
you didn't even name the Orlando Magic.
No, I didn't because frankly, I think Paolo hasn't been great this season, and I don't think Orlando's looking as good as maybe we thought they could be this season. But they're there. I mean, they are there in the mix, and I guess that's my point. Is like it feels like all these teams are in the mix, and there's not much separation. Where are you at on what you've seen from teams in the East so far?
I think when it's all said and done, I think the Cleveland Cavaliers, the New York Knicks, the Detroit Pistons will be, the creme de la creme of the Eastern Conference. The Atlanta Hawks next season will be in a better position just because they have draft capital and they have a Jalen Johnson who's been playing his at dollar off this season. So, but I think this season, I definitely think it's gonna. I think Cleveland played very mediocre to begin the season, and I think them adding the pieces that they added over the weekend and in that trade, I think adding Dennis Schroeder is definitely going to help them because you really were having Donovan Mitchell play more point, and he needs to play off the ball in order to be successful in Kenny Atkinson's offense. Um, I also think the Boston Celtics are going to be there
Mm,
without Jason Tatum. Assuming they keep Anthony Simons, who I think was a diamond in the rough in that move with the Portland Trailblazers.
yes.
And I just really vibe well with the Boston Celtics. I'll tell you this publicly. Those around me know this, and I'll share it with you. I'm really mesmerized by not just Boston's tenacity this season, but how much their faith ties into their 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 success this season.
Mm,
Um, you got one guy on the team that has alopecia, and he and I actually sat down and talked about that. I also have alopecia. You have a Ron Harper Jr., who was a
mm,
two-way player on that team,
mm,
son of Ron Harper Sr., six-time NBA champion or five-time NBA champion, and brother of Dylan Harper, both alum of Don Bosco Prep, by the way, my alma mater. But in addition to that, um, their head coach, Joe Mazzulla, is somebody that I've really gotten to know since his time as an assistant coach with the Boston Celtics and now the head coach. Um, about a month ago, he and I, in a press conference, talked about his faith in a Bible verse that he leans on. And I wrote the article, and I wake up the next morning, I get an email from Joe Mazzulla. Brandon, thank you for asking me about my faith. It's not often you get those type of questions, and I'm paraphrasing. I'm like, how'd Joe get my email? But nonetheless, you tend to root for people who you get to know and you kind of know their backstory and how intense they are with their preparation. I've
mm.
heard many of stories of how Joe has prepares for games, and some maybe I can't say on this programming, but unorthodox in his approach. But I really dig him, and I really feel like you asked me about the Eastern Conference, and when I watch the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Denver Nuggets, for example, on TV, it makes me feel like I'm watching the 90s with the Spurs again. And when I look at Joe Mazzulla and I look at the Celtics, it feels like the makings of the Spurs and Greg Popovich and just some of his off-color remarks and just his way of connecting with young and older players. And I really think that where we are right now is we're developing the next tradition of or the next 10 to 15 years of basketball in the NBA. And I like where we are as a league a lot. Like we talk about LeBron getting old. He hasn't missed a beat. We're talking about who's going to be the next face of the league, and everybody seemingly points to Victor Wembanyama, a 7'4" center from Paris, France, to be the next face. And LeBron says, not yet. I'm not done. He seemingly could come to the Eastern Conference if he decides that he doesn't want to retire at season's end. And I really do think that if he does go to Cleveland, that's going to make Cleveland an instant contender. They already are a contender. So, I just think when you look at the Eastern Conference, I think it's up for the taking, and I do think that there's room to grow for everybody.
Yeah, and that's why like the Giannis component, as we know, is so crucial to understanding like where we're going to be in the East going forward. Because we do have the younger stars in the East that are coming up, Maxi and Paolo and Cade, right? So to your point, it is up for grabs, and it's like it's wondering, one of these young stars going to take control of the East? Hard to say anyone's going to have a run in the East like LeBron did. So not to compare it to that, but just who will be kind of the staples, who will be those consistent staples going forward in the Eastern Conference. And I'm glad I like what you said about Boston and Joe Mazzulla. Man, the way they play, right? They got a lot of flack for all the threes they shoot, right? Even I've been a little critical of Tatum at times when it just felt like I'm like, man, you're too great of a shot creator to be relying on a sidestep three to the right every time you need a bucket. So sometimes it kind of threw me off, but like I'm all for 7 seconds or less. If you're open, shoot the ball, swing, get a good look. If you're open, shoot it. And that's the way Boston plays. And that style, I think, is a big reason why, Derek White can step up. Peyton Pritchard can step up. They're still in a system that keeps their players dynamic. And they still have good players, of course.
Without it, Al Horford and the Kristaps Porzingis and their system going on to other teams, they're still relevant in the Eastern Conference.
Great point about like that. That's that kind of Spursian thing that you talked about too, that it feels like that right now.
That, and you also know that the Celtics organization, like the Dallas Mavericks organization, their majority owners switched, and so a
Mm.
lot of times when you switch owners, they're not required to um, keep you. I think what Boston did after their finals run in 2024 was they re-signed a lot of those guys and got them paid. So then when those guys moved on, they still were taken care of. In comparison, you looked at the Dallas Mavericks organization, and we can go on and on in the day with how Luka Doncic was ultimately traded to the Los Angeles Lakers, and they were in the finals the year before. I really do believe kind of what I know and
Mm.
really what I know, and that the Dallas Mavericks was a case study on what not to do when you have a star player. And I really do think that the Boston Celtics has taken notes. And it's going to be interesting to see if the Los Angeles Lakers will also follow suit because, as you know, Jeannie Buss and her brothers are no longer the majority governors of the Los Angeles Lakers, and there's a new ownership group that's there. And so you're looking at Luka Doncic as the cornerstone, and what happens with LeBron, whether he decides to take less money to stay there or ultimately have that quote unquote retirement tour that people speak of in Cleveland. And it's interesting because the more and more you're looking at LeBron, you're wondering, is this actually his retirement tour in real time? And he's showing you, and you just people aren't getting it.
Right. I mean, what do you think about that? Does it feel like that? I don't know. I mean, sometimes I'll be looking. I know he has like a crew following him for a documentary, so that's added to what maybe they're like. Maybe he's treating this as his last season and hasn't really told us yet. I don't know.
I can tell you that the crew that people speak of, the Los Angeles Lakers, of course, has their social media team, and then the league has their social. Mikey Jim Ice is the guy over with the head of content for the NBA. And so those guys are normally around him. And just from being around the Lakers this season and just knowing who's around LeBron, just different pieces, um, I think that there is a documentary. I don't know, but I think that there's a documentary that is happening. Um, Similarly to when I was around Shea Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder last season, and they ultimately were trailing them. I just happened to know somebody from the league office who clued me in. I haven't had that conversation about LeBron, but I also do think that LeBron has not totally made up his mind. That's a combination of conversations I've had and just observations.
Hmm.
I think that LeBron being in the last year of his deal, the pressure is both on the Lakers and on LeBron um, going into the playoffs this season. Um, if they fall short, the questions are going to start mounting in Los Angeles. If they go deep in the playoffs, I think it's going to be hard for LeBron to say, I'm not coming back. It might be easier to say, this is it. I'm leaving on top. So I think that's why there's this unknown. If I can, in my years being around the NBA, and this is about my sister Candace is 29. I started working around the NBA and the year after she was born. So this is year 28 of me being around the NBA. I've been around Kobe, I've been around LeBron, I've been around Michael Jordan. Um, and if I can compare this to anything, this reminds me somewhat of 1998, Michael Jordan's last year, where you saw him at the Garden wearing Air Jordan 1s with his feet bleeding. Um, Michael didn't give an answer as to whether he was leaving, but then when you watch The Last Dance, you realize why he left years later. I will say that there is some front office parallel between the Bulls and the Lakers. There are some differences as well.
Hmm.
Just in my observations of being around the league, it feels like Michael in 98.
I have felt like we may see the best versions of LeBron later in the season. At at his age, he's kind of gonna get warmed up, go have the sciatica, like going through those little things and kinks and stuff. At his age, that stuff's gonna come up. But man, I still can't get over. I watching the highlights from the Knicks game, seeing him go up and down, catch the two-handed oop. Right, I'm just like. He's 41. And not only is he 41, Brandon, he's 6'9", 250. Like that just adds to how ridiculous this is, right? Like not just his age, but at his size. The fact that he's not breaking down is remarkable. Not only is he not breaking down, he's still running around, jumping around, catching oops. Like, I mean, it's just crazy. Cooper Flagg, is he as good or better than you thought he would be?
Better. I knew going into the season, my prediction for the NBA's Rookie of the Year was Dylan Harper. I think what I'll say is on a grander note, the 2025 draft class, DJ Edgecombe, Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, and more.
Knuppel, your
Oh
boy
yeah,
in Charlotte. Whew.
yes, I can't leave him out.
Yeah.
Knuppel is as advertised.
Like it's a lot. It's like it feels like there right? Like a lot of hitters.
There is a dexterity in that draft class that is unmatched, and I'm excited to see. Like everybody talks about this 2016 draft class, the 2003 draft class, the 1984 draft class, the 1996 draft class. But we got to get some younger people that we're discussing. The youth are undefeated, and I really do think that Cooper Flagg is one of the headliners, if not the headliner of that class. And the thing that's benefited him quite a bit is Kyrie Irving's absence, Anthony Davis's absence on a Jason Kidd led team. And I'm glad J Kidd stayed with Dallas and didn't find himself the greener pastures with the New York Knicks, who were heavily interested in him and his services. And if the Dallas Mavericks ultimately do trade Anthony Davis at the deadline, I am hearing that the Atlanta Hawks have interest in both Davis and Zach LaVine, who are both clutch clients of Rich Paul. I do think that it'll be interesting to see how much more damage Cooper Flagg can do in the second half of the season. And if Kyrie Irving does come back, I think sky's the limit for that team. And just watching youth and future faces of the league continue to flourish.
I think the most interesting thing when I look at the dynamic unfolding with Cooper Flagg, and I had said this when it looked like they were gonna be able to draft him number one, he represents almost all of what is the opposite of Luka. He's athletic. He does a little bit of everything. He plays defense. We all know the golden ticket with Luka is his astronomical offensive ability. And it's so great that they made a finals appearance with him, right? They were successful with Luka. And yeah, we can debate about the trade and all that, right? And being able to get the number one pick and turn it into Cooper Flagg. Sure, that was luck. That wasn't they couldn't have coordinated that.
Gotta
Um,
coordinate.
yeah, for that to happen in that way, I just find that really interesting that Cooper Flagg as a basketball player represents a lot of what they complained about with Luka. I just think that's fascinating.
I'm not ready to make comparisons. I think he's his own man, and he's kicking butt in a Nike-dominated league wearing New Balance. I love it.
Brandon Scoop B. Robinson, NBA insider, scoopy.com, Scoop B Radio. Good to have you here, my friend. Keep up that aura. Not many people can pull off the cane, and he's pulling up to these arenas, walking through the tunnels. Doc Rivers asking, "What's up with the cane?" Like it's working, man. I told you, it's that aura. It's the aura, man. This is your aura season. People can't pull that off. People can't pull that off like a lot of people can't pull off the fits that you get off. So come on now, you different.
I'm different, and I'm also bringing out different canes. When I don't have to, I was wearing that. Yeah, I'm,
See.
I'm feeling like Claire Hanks Huxtable on the Cosby Show.
Yeah.
Pillowcase for her butt. So we use the brass cane every day. Now when I have an everyday cane, it's more orthopedic looking.
I love it. See, I love it. Listen. I'm not looking for credit, but I told you to own that thing. Did I not? What did I not tell you? You had it was work. I was looking at a couple photos, and I'm like, my first thought is like, man, I hope Brandon's feeling okay. Hope he's doing all right. Glad he's getting around. But then then I see you keep going, and it's like, oh no, this is part of the brand now. Lord, this the brand. And think about, how sometimes players will break their nose and then they wear the mask.
Yeah.
And then when their nose gets better, they still wear the mask because they just get used to the feeling and the aura of it. Hey man, I told you, lean into that cane. Lean into it, man.
Crazy to look at the foreshadowing because Cleveland was the reason why I kept using the cane. And then you saw Luka with listen, it's scary on them courts, man. I'm yeah. It's the combination of what you said and just the aura, like that brass cane. I might have to call that company and have them send me a few other ones and see what we could work out.
Let's go, man. I'm all in it. I'm all for it, man. I love it. Great to see you, man. Glad that you're doing well.
Likewise, I'm glad to see you, and keep kicking butt and taking names.
Thanks for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe to Basketball Society right here on YouTube so you don't miss any more episodes and you can stay tapped in.